So a bit of time has passed since my previous video going over one of the many mysteries in the original Resident Evil 4, and I couldn't even imagine that it would have received such an overwhelmingly positive and passionate feedback. I have remarked a few times in that initial video, as well as in the comments, that I love anything Resident Evil 4 related, and the abundance of mysteries, secrets and weird things in that game is the reason why I think it's a masterpiece to this day, and I want to make videos hopefully discussing more mysteries in the near future. So a massive thank you to everyone who interacted with that last video, it means a lot. The thing that surprised me was how much people loved the dog theory in particular. I think over half of the comments were just talking about the dog, and I love that. Although I was kind of being sarcastic to an extent, I still considered the dog to be worthy of writing the letter, and many of you came up with even more reasons to support that theory. I've also received many comments in defense of some characters of whom I have conclusively disregarded, specifically those adamant that Ada or Lewis could have still written the letter, so I want to go over them again. If you haven't watched the first video, then I'd recommend that you do, in order to gather the context of the letter as well as its identifying features that were used to whittle down the characters. A point made here was that the letter has already been officially confirmed by Capcom in a Japanese guidebook, which details that Ada wrote the letter. I was made aware of this when researching for that video. It's actually on the first page when you type "who wrote the anonymous letter Resident Evil 4" into Google. I do believe that Capcom obviously made an executive decision as a placeholder for the letter, being that this theory is relatively redundant and they didn't expect much people to look into it. This was also published before the PlayStation 2 port of the game, which included the new Separate Ways game mode. Evidently, the smaller team who developed Separate Ways weren't made aware of such a vague detail in the anonymous letter, and that's why Ada's massive amount of conflictions are apparent throughout. So thank you for these comments for bringing it up. But to repeat what I said in the video, it was still impossible. I don't care that it's supposed to be Ada that wrote the letter. If Capcom made this mistake to verify Ada's involvement, even though it's clear that she was nowhere near the lake at any point in the game, then that's fine. But in the game's medium, it physically couldn't have happened. The merchant can teleport, Ada cannot. We even play as her when she gets knocked out and gets dragged down to the opposite side of the village during the events of 1-3 for Leon. We've all played the game, we've all played Separate Ways. I know for a fact that Ada didn't write this thing. Capcom saying that Ada wrote the letter isn't good enough for me, and it shouldn't be for anyone else either given their history of plot holes in these games. Even though it's just a video game and writing inconsistencies are normal, I don't think that Capcom would have overlooked this, even during production of Separate Ways a few years down the line. Did Capcom just use Ada as a deterrent for us to stop asking questions? I think it's possible. They didn't want us knowing that the dog was the culprit after all. Someone else correctly stated that Ada was actually the one who placed the key behind the waterfall. Going back to the guidebook, it's evident that she would have had to have known about the waterfall if she were to write the letter. Although her location is completely off, which is still enough to disprove her involvement in my opinion, there is slightly more evidence and support for her than I initially thought. Ada was under intelligence of Wesker and Krauser as a byproduct, making him an informant to an extent as he is partially friendly with Sadler, who knows literally everything.
What's the news on our friend Leon?
He's not making it easy. The sample?
Sadler's got it. It seems he sniffed out our little game.
Perfect.
Just so we understand each other clearly, I don't trust you, nor does Wesker. If you try to do anything clever, I will kill you.
Is that so? You know, I met Wesker long before you.
We'll see soon enough if you did.
There are a few other comments from people who believe that Ada could have written the letter. However, I think that these three best describe the most valid defences in relation to Ada's involvement, and I really enjoyed reading these and discovering more information about the characters. Lewis is, as always, still the most popular character even after all the evidence was put forward. Although not as definitive as Ada's, I mostly had problems with Lewis's behaviour in the instances where we meet him, as well as the fact that he doesn't know, or at least he acts like he doesn't know Ashley's name, even though she's mentioned in the letter. I also explained that it would have been really weird for Lewis to travel to the lake in a time where he was being ruthlessly hunted by Sadler to help a guy who he barely knows at this point in the game, with evidence from documents clarifying that Lewis was never expected to help strangers or outsiders. But like Ada, there's a massive amount of support and defense for Lewis despite this, which is really interesting. The majority of the comments regarding Lewis were smart to point out that his attitude towards Leon seemed very suspicious and methodical in the instances where we meet and interact with him. When he was tied up, he mentioned that he used to be a police officer in Madrid. Now, I took this information literally when I first heard it, although he was most likely just trying to seem cordial with Leon in order to fish information out of him. It was the same tactic he used on Ashley at the cabin later on.
Perhaps the young lady might want to introduce herself first before asking someone his name.
Her name's Ashley Graham, the president's daughter.
The point is that Lewis is very smart, and he most likely already knew Ashley's name from the very start of the game. He was also in contact with Ada during the village section, who could have addressed Ashley's name at any point. The greeting we saw at the cabin was simply an attempt to make conversation and negate any suspicion towards himself. Although this is a good point, the reason why I disregarded this and took his comments seriously was the fact that he recklessly gave away his name on the first instance where he was asked.
And who might you be?
Me llamo Luis Serra. I used to be a cop in Madrid. But now I'm just a good-for-nothing guy who happens to be quite a ladies' man.
Why'd you quit?
Phew, policia. You put your life on the line. Nobody really appreciates you enough for it.
As smart and as measured as Lewis is, if he was trying to use a cover story, the first thing you do is use a fake name. So I stand by the fact that Lewis was never afraid of Leon and never really tried to lie his way out of trouble. I still believe that I didn't know Ashley's name at the cabin for whatever reason, although I could be wrong. Another quick point made was that it was Lewis who wrote the letter, simply based on the fact that Capcom would have wanted to keep the immersion by separating the gameplay and the story elements. I agree that if the merchant suddenly started showing up in real cutscenes and having something to do with the plot directly, then it would be really off-putting. However, I think that's part of the reason why the anonymous letter is so fascinating. It's the fact that literally anything or anyone could have written this, and it's up to the players to draw their own conclusions, as ridiculous as some of them are. If anything, the secrecy of the letter makes the obscure characters more favourable in my opinion. Those who are barely involved in the actual story at all. It's mysterious, as it should be. Also, some of the newer theories I've heard are absolutely amazing, and I love every single one of them. I'm going to go over most that I can now. I'm not going to try and disprove any of these, as I still strongly believe that the merchant was the one who wrote the letter, as stated in my previous video. These are just for fun, and it's more enjoyable that way anyway.
My name is Osmond Sadler, the master of this fine religious community.
I have heard a lot of comments giving their belief that Osmond Sadler himself was the one to write the letter, and some of the reasons in support for him are actually very convincing. This guy gave an entire paragraph of evidence, which helps me a lot honestly, otherwise I'd have to go through more documents. Obviously, Sadler would have known everything regarding Ashley's name, her location, the insignia's location, and it's very suspicious that we first meet him here at the church right after rescuing Ashley. It's as if the letter was a trap of some sort. It would also make sense why he left Leon on the floor without waking him up, as Sadler states numerous times in the game that it was never his intention to kill Leon. Only Mendez and Salazar were correct to assume that keeping Leon alive would lead to massive problems. Sadler wanted Leon to become an associate.
I must hand it to you. You've demonstrated quite a bit of promise by killing Krauser. When your assimilation with Las Plagas is complete, I'll have you serve as my guard.
Leaving Leon on the floor for 5 hours while the parasites took control of his body was definitely a solid motive for his involvement. And also, the reason why Sadler didn't want to inform Leon about the Las Palagas until he met him at the church was probably to avoid Leon gaining any more intelligence about the village and informing Hunnigan, so he waited for Leon to show up at the church to bring this up, well, face to face. This person also stated that the eccentric and meticulous personality of Sadler fits well, and it would make sense to why he'd bother writing this. To be honest, I 100% see Sadler trying to raise Leon's hopes just to destroy them later for his entertainment. The terminology of the letter is oddly very accurate with Sadler's personality. Honestly, this was a very fun theory to read, and I love the evidence put forward to support this, even if it is absolutely hilarious.
Forget your makeup or something?
This is another theory that I came up with after going through every character in the game and trying to find any parallels associated with the anonymous letter. We all know that the passenger seat police officer was killed at the stake in Pueblo. We've all seen it. But the second police officer dies much later in the game, coincidentally right before we cross the lake. So he definitely escaped long enough to head down the river towards the lake before he was eventually caught. Honestly, this could be a mystery in of itself, but could he have written the letter in time? He would have been able to bypass the secret entrance to the church by heading upstream, buying him about an hour over Leon. He would have known Ashley's name. Being assigned to assist Leon in his mission would have warranted this sort of information, and he immediately informs Leon about the village when they reach the bridge.
Just up ahead is the village.
I'll go and have a look around.
We'll stay and watch that car. Don't want to get any parking tickets.
Right. Parking tickets.
Good luck.
So he had at least a modest understanding of the area. His serious but joking personality is also decently related to the nature of the letter. Other than that, there wasn't much else to elaborate any further. Even after searching the car for anything resembling handwriting, there isn't much to dissect here. But it's still another character who I'd normally wouldn't even think twice about, and giving these more obscure characters a spotlight is deserving. It was still more likely to be this guy than Ada, but you know, Capcom said so, so I've got to go along with it and not enjoy exploring any other possibilities.
So maybe you have 9 lives, but it doesn't matter now, Mr. Kennedy. I've sent my right hand to dispose of you.
It may seem like I'm scraping the barrel at this point, but I have a really good reason. We know that Salazar is a calm and measured person despite his eccentric exchanges with Leon. He doesn't really go off script or show any frustration until Leon survives the pitfall and shoots a bullet in his ear. But he also didn't like it when Leon mentioned this.
So maybe you have 9 lives, but it doesn't matter now, Mr. Kennedy. I've sent my right hand to dispose of you.
Your right hand comes off?
Say whatever you please. Die, you worm!
Now, this may just come across as a normal reaction after what happened before, but I think Leon might be onto something. In the time periods representative of the castle, I'm going to assume the Middle Ages, since the Los Illuminatos are extremely religious, and is the most accurate depiction judging by the weaponry and the heavy displays of medieval art. My point is that being left-handed was considered heresy, and the Holy Inquisition labelled it witchcraft, which would see many left-handed people be put to death. Next to 0.0% of people were left-handed during this time, so why on earth is Salazar left-handed? Unfortunately, when I look back at his cutscenes, he actually uses both of his hands equally, but it's just a weird thing to do. You'd use your dominant hand to gesture like this, always. So what if Salazar's right hand actually did have a mind of its own, and did come off? And that's why Salazar had to learn to use both hands equally. Maybe the hand could have swimmed to the other side of the lake and written Leon the letter while Salazar was unaware. Maybe the dog could have teamed up with Salazar's hand, since the dog needed an accurate way of writing coherently. Forget Ada, Lewis, or the merchant. This is the new definitive answer in my opinion. In all seriousness, I am very grateful for the amount of suggestions presented in the last video, and I will be tackling more Resident Evil 4 mysteries in depth that I find interesting. Someone suggested that I tackle the crane hook mystery near the end of the game, which I would love to do next, honestly. I will say again that mysteries have always been a prevalent feature in this game, and that's the reason why I and so many other people love it so much.